Please like and subscribe.
Last winter. Winter came mercilessly to the canyon. Snow fell layer upon layer until the paths disappeared under a white blanket, and even memories of greenery now seemed like a dream. The wind howled between the stone walls, penetrating through the cracks in the old house, like someone's mournful voice, forgotten here forever. Evelyn Rose lived on the very edge of both the canyon and life. Her house was dilapidated, with a door held together by a rope and a roof that dripped even when the sky was dry. It had been 3 winters since Tom, her husband, had not returned. He had been killed on the southern border of Arizona. Since then, Evelyn had not worn black, not out of stubbornness, but because mourning was everywhere, in the air, in the silence of the mornings, in the cracked cup from which he once drank coffee. She was left with only one companion, an old mare named Sol. The animal was as ancient and exhausted as the winter itself. She coughed at night and could barely stand on her feet. Evelyn shared her last crumbs of flour and dry grass with her. On the 5th day of the blizzard, she was awakened by a strange sound, not the wind or snow, but as if someone had dropped a stone at the door. She wrapped herself in a woolen scarf and an old men's cloak and opened the door. A man was lying on the threshold, a young man with dark hair matted with snow and blood, his skin the color of copper. His breathing was barely audible, as if winter itself had already sentenced him to death. A bronze ring had slipped off his finger, and his hand clutched a piece of fur tightly. A Navajo bead and leather amulet hung around his neck. Evelyn remembered that her husband called him the Invisible One, the shadow behind the bush. But now she wasn't thinking about the past. She knew only one thing. He was all alone. She dragged the young man into the house, heavily, without words, with her last ounce of strength. She lit the stove with the remains of some rags and heated water in a tin mug. The only food left was a piece of dried meat as old as Saul himself. Evelyn chewed it up, as she had once done for her dying father. The young man was delirious. The fever burned him like a flame. He whispered words in an unfamiliar language, and only one of them, "Tahoe," sounded clear. She stroked his hair not as a woman would a man, but as one human being would another. Even if he were a wolf, she would have done the same. By morning, the young man's breathing had become more even. Evelyn realized that he would survive, but not here. She went out to the barn. Salt raised her head, as if she already knew what was happening. She mounted the horse, not without pain. Her joints ached, her hands trembled. A water flask and a bag of crumbs were tied to the saddle. She helped Tahoe up, and he staggered out the door. He didn't say a word, but the look he gave Evelyn stayed with her forever. Saul stepped into the white void and didn't look back. Evelyn stood at the door, clutching her chest as if she could mend her broken heart that way. She knew she would never see them again. But at that moment, for the first time in many months, she felt that here, at the edge of the world, she had done something right, waiting for death. After Saul's footprints disappeared in the snow, the house fell silent. Evelyn sat by the wall all day, staring at the crack from which the wind sang the same song over and over again. Not a sound could be heard. Not a star was visible in the sky. The world became empty, like an old clay bowl from which everything had long since flowed out, and no one had noticed. She did not cry. The tears had gone earlier, even before dinner. The human in her became light, almost weightless. It seemed that she herself was a spirit, forgotten at the very edge of the canyon. Tom came at night. He appeared in the doorway just as he had been in life, in the saddle, tired, tanned, with that same smile that could forgive anything. Evelyn reached out to him, but he dissolved like the shadow of a lamp when the wind extinguished the flame. She wrote him letters. It was the only thing she had left. She was almost out of paper, but she kept writing, using the margins of an old Bible, the backs of recipes, even the inside of her shirt. "Tom, I can no longer hear the birds, not even the ones that used to hide under the roof. Now only the wind sings. If you were here, you would say, "One more winter, and that's it." But you're not here, and winter is everything. She didn't know what happens to the body when it decides to die. It turned out to be surprisingly gentle. It was as if a spring had clicked inside, and everything around her became silent. The food ran out on the third day. She melted snow for water. Then the snow turned dark, smelling of soot, and she stopped drinking. The house breathed with her, creaking floorboards, howling through the cracks. Sometimes she thought she heard Tom's voice, a quiet whisper in her ear. "It's time, Ev." And she nodded. She was ready. On the fifth day, the blizzard dissipated across the entire expanse. The air turned blue, like in old paintings. Evelyn opened the door and for a moment couldn't believe her eyes. The horizon was clear, the canyon glistened like a knife blade, and white waves of snow hid all living things. She knew it was time to leave, not because she hoped to find something. Number. The body had to lie where it would not be eaten by rats and where no one would hear its useless moans. She put on everything she had, 2 shirts, Tom's sweater, and wrapped her legs in rags. She left no note. To whom? Everything she could say was already in the letters hidden in a tin box under the stove. When she stepped outside, the snow crunched, like her first step into another world. The world was dazzlingly clear, and her hands trembled not from the cold, but from a strange calmness. She walked slowly down the slope to the old birch tree by the frozen stream. There, once upon a time, Tom had made her a nest out of branches when their tent broke during their first year living there. There they laughed, ate, and loved each other. Now she sat under that tree, hugging her knees. Snow settled on her shoulders like a blanket. Somewhere in the distance, a crow cried out and fell silent. Her eyes closed. And at the last moment, before everything faded into whiteness, she thought, what if Tahoe had survived after all? And she dissolved into the snowy silence. The herd on the horizon, the warmth came not as a return, but as a betrayal, burning, inappropriate. Between the sleepy emptiness and the silence of death, Evelyn felt her body come alive again, wet, sick, real. She moaned. The sound escaped unbidden, as if her flesh itself was surprised by its existence. She opened her eyes. The ceiling was made of fabric, tightly stretched, with black patterns resembling birds in flight. The air smelled of smoke and herbs. This was not her home. Her body ached, but she could move. Her hands lay on a fur blanket, and someone had left dry skin in her fingers, a talisman woven from horsehair and blue thread. The door lifted and slammed shut with the wind. 2 women entered. One was old, with a face lined with wrinkles like a map of mountains. The other was younger, with long braids and eyes the color of earth after rain. They didn't say a word, just came over, changed the bandages on her chest, brought her water, and placed a warm bowl of soup in her hand. Evelyn wanted to ask, "Where am I? Who are you?" But her tongue was dry and her voice was stone. Her lips only moved slightly. The old woman touched her forehead with her palm and said softly,
"You are here. Live."
Voices, dogs barking, and the clatter of hooves could be heard outside the yurt. She closed her eyes, allowing the world to float around her like a boat on a river into which she had been thrown without oars. When her strength returned, she was able to sit by the hearth. They brought her food, corn, beans, dried meat. She began to learn the rhythm of this world, dawn with smoke over the rocks, evening with dancing shadows, the laughter of children weaving ropes from grass. Time flowed like meltwater, slowly but inexorably. And then one day, when the sun was particularly gentle, the yurt opened slightly, and Tahoe entered. He was thin, with a bandage on his shoulder, but he stood confidently. In his hand he held not a weapon, but a corn cob. On his belt was a knife wrapped in red cloth. Evelyn looked at him, unable to utter a word. Her heart beat like a bird in a cage. He sat down next to her. He was silent for a long time, and then, quietly, in English, with an accent, but clearly,
"You gave me everything you had. I haven't forgotten."
She nodded, and only then did she feel tears running down her cheeks. She said nothing. Her voice had not yet returned, but Tahoe understood without words. He left and returned an hour later with them. First there was a sound, a rhythmic pounding, a rumbling, as if the earth were breathing with hooves. Then silhouettes. Mustangs moved in the white light of the dust. 30, maybe 40. Different colors. Bay, gray, black. One almost golden. The herd filled the space in front of the camp like a tide. They stopped at the command of a single whistle, all except one. The one in front slowly approached Evelyn. Salt. Thin, but alive. Its grey coat glistened in the cold and sun. Its eyes were clear. It nudged Evelyn's shoulder with its soft muzzle. Evelyn covered her face with her hands and cried. Sobs, tremors, as if from hunger, but of a different kind. Tahoe didn't look at her. He looked at the sky.
It's a gift,
He said.
from the tribe, for your kindness, for the blood you saved.
The tribe. He spoke as if she were now part of it. And at that moment, despite the foreign language, clothing, and customs, she felt something warm inside her for the first time that winter. The next day, the women wove threads with shells into her hair. The children brought a small foal. It's yours if you want it, they said. Salt grazed near the herd, sometimes coming over just to stand next to her, untethered, as if there was now a thread between them, stronger than a bridle. When the sun set, Tahoe approached again. He did not sit down or speak. He just stood nearby, like a guard. And for the first time, Evelyn thought, maybe death had passed her by, after all. The path between worlds. The morning began with the smell of smoke and herbs. They rose before dawn in the camp, as if the day had to be scraped out of the ground itself, like prey. Evelyn woke up in the yurt, wrapped in furs, hearing water boiling behind the thin wall, children laughing, and leather harnesses creaking. Now she had a name, not her own, but one given to her by the tribe. Become Snow. The elders gave it to her because she had come out of a blizzard and returned, like a miracle. Evelyn accepted this name as if it were a warm scarf or blanket, with gratitude but with slight doubt. She did not know how to be part of something bigger, but she learned every day. First, words. The women taught her Navajo, showing her objects, water, the sun, repeating until the language became obedient. Then, sewing, even stitches on leather, beadwork, small gifts that the women exchanged instead of words of thanks. Then food. Corn baked in the coals, meat dried over the fire, hot flatbread baked on a stone. She worked alongside the others, and one day, when an old woman named Ashki handed her a spoonful of steaming soup and said something gentle, Evelyn knew she had been accepted. Tahoe rarely came by. He was busy, going with the men to the rocks, tending to the herd, carrying wounds he didn't talk about, but he always looked for her when he returned. And one day he called her.
Tomorrow, to the mountains,
He said. They walked together until the camp became a distant dot below. Ahead lay hills with trails and crevices, like the palms of a giant. Tahoe was silent for a long time, then said quietly,
Spirits live here.
He showed her how to walk without giving herself away to the wind, how to listen not with her ears, but with her skin, how to see signs, rabbit tracks, a broken branch, a hair on a thorn. He taught her patience, and after 3 hours of silent waiting, a coyote appeared on the slope. They sat motionless, and Evelyn felt that she had become part of the air. At night, sitting by the fire, Tahoe told her about his mother, who had died when he was a child, and the song he sang at celebrations. About his brother, who had gone to war and never returned. About his name, Tahoe, the one who goes first. He didn't ask about her past, but she told him herself, about Tom, who arrived with a rifle and a smile, about the house, about the loss, about winter and the Mustang. He listened silently.
You stayed because you had roots,
He said at the end. The snow melted, the grass turned green. Evelyn sewed new clothes, a shirt with tassels, light pants, sandals. Her hair was braided like the women of the tribe. The children stopped being afraid of her, and the dogs lay down at her feet. They called her Become Snow and Woman with Hooves because she walked alongside the Mustangs as if she understood them. But inside, she lived in fear, not for her body, but for her heart. When Tahoe looked at her for a long time and silently, as if reading a map of the world, she felt a tremor that had nothing to do with the cold. Love was a trap for her. Her first love ended in war and an unmarked grave. The new man in her life was too close, too quiet, and she was afraid to breathe. Tahoe understood this. He was in no hurry. Once, as they watched the golden sunset together, he said,
People come and go, but if you stand next to me on the right day, we will become one breath.
She was silent, watching the wind in Soli's mane. One moonless night, a boy burst into the camp, covered in dust and fear. He reported that strangers had appeared at the pass, white men with guns and unsaddled Mustangs. One of them wore scalps. Tahoe immediately stood up. Evelyn looked at his silhouette in the fire, a shadow that could disappear. For the first time, she approached and touched his hand. He looked at her. They said nothing, but understood each other. Snakes in the sand. Summer in the canyon began with the smell of blood. The morning dawned with a low, grey sky, like ashes from a bonfire. The birds fell silent, as if sensing trouble. Tahoe was gloomier than usual, his eyes tired from endless tracks and disturbing news. Bad news was brought to the camp several times. Livestock was missing, 2 boys had disappeared, and the remains of fires with burnt branches and black earth were found on the trails. The tracks were unfamiliar. Heavy boots, unfamiliar sandals. People who carry death with them. Evelyn learned to feel fear not as a sharp blow, but as a dark shadow creeping behind the women's backs and slipping into short, muffled conversations by the fire. In the evenings, laughter no longer rang out in the camp, and even the children knew that at dusk they had to stay close to the yurts. Once, at the well, she heard a name, Garrett. They spoke quietly, almost in whispers. A white scalp hunter who traveled with a gang and took Navajo heads for money, or, just for the sake of it, for no reason. He was feared not for his strength, but for his madness. He killed as if he were looking for someone he had long lost. And then Evelyn realized it was him, the very one who had taken Tom from her. During the day, she went to gather herbs, not with Tahoe, but alone. She took a knife and a flask and went into the shade of the gorge. Everything here was ancient. The stones looked like bones. The air was filled with the scent of eternity. She was gathering leaves when she heard a rustle, not of an animal, but of a human. She turned and saw a young man, a Navajo, about 17 years old, wounded, with an arrow in his shoulder. She rushed to him. He looked at her with distrust. A white woman in tribal clothing, with hands that smelled of lavender.
Quiet,
She said.
I know what to do.
He did not resist, though he did not understand. She pulled out the arrow, pressed on the wound, and took out a rag. Her heart was pounding in her throat. Enemies could be nearby. She heard voices approaching from a distance. She lifted the young man, who was almost unconscious, and dragged him into a narrow crevice between the rocks, hid him behind a boulder, and covered him with her body. She prayed as she had in childhood, fiercely and helplessly. Not now, Lord. The voices passed by. One laughed, the other said,
It's too quiet here. Let's go to the water. We'll get it there.
They left. When everything quieted down, Evelyn cried. Not out of fear, out of exhaustion, because she found herself once again between worlds, between who she was and who she was becoming. The young man's name was Cash. They brought him to the camp. The elders said, He's alive, thanks to her. The women touched Evelyn's shoulder and whispered blessings. Tahoe was silent, just watching. There was concern in his gaze, not for her, but for her. He knew she hadn't just gone out for herbs. That night, he took her to the mouth of the stream, where the water flowed slowly, reflecting the stars as if in a bowl.
You shouldn't have gone alone,
He said.
I had to.
She replied. He was silent. She approached him and placed her hand on his chest. His heart was beating there, just like hers. He closed his eyes.
I'm afraid.
She whispered.
Of love. Of you. Of myself.
He opened his eyes and took her hands.
Don't be a snake in the sand. Don't hide. You now have two names, the white one and the one given by the earth. You don't have to choose.
A couple of days later, one of the scouts returned to camp with bad news. Strangers were close. 3 men, among them a redhead with a scar. Garrett. Evelyn clutched the knife under her clothes. In the evening, Ashki, an old woman, came to her and brought a bundle with a necklace made of bones and shells, a symbol of a bride. Ashki said,
If you accept it, you will become part of the clan. Tahoe has already informed the elders. Now it's up to you.
Evelyn was silent, holding the necklace as if it were a musket, with weight and choice. The old woman left, leaving her in silence. At dawn, the dance of dust began. Sand swirled underfoot. Women walked in circles, in spirals. Bracelets jingled. They sang. Evelyn watched from afar, clutching the necklace. Tahoe stood at the edge of the circle, alone, waiting. She took a step, then another, but she did not enter. Not yet. Ashes, rain, and flames. The night before the dance was unusually warm. The sky sparkled with stars, and the air was filled with the scent of sage and smoke. The women let down their hair, donned festive dresses, and wore protective symbols on their foreheads and leather and copper bracelets on their wrists. Evelyn couldn't sleep. She sat by her yurt, clutching a necklace in her hands. She ran her fingers over each shell as if reciting a prayer. Fragments of memories swirled in her head. Tom's voice, Tahoe's gaze, Cash's cry, the winter howl of the wind, old letters, and the smell of Mustangs. She thought the answer would come in silence. But now she understood that a decision is born when it can no longer be postponed. At dawn, the ceremony began. The tribe gathered in a large circle. The women sang songs. The men beat out a rhythm on drums made from animal skins. Dust swirled in the air as if the spirits of their ancestors were walking with them. Evelyn stood aside, trembling inside, and suddenly she took a step forward. She stepped right into the circle. There was a deathly silence. Tacho looked at her, without a smile, with something big in his eyes. She picked up the necklace and put it on herself.
I'm here.
She said quietly. And at that moment, a scream rang out. First one, then several more. The screams of the guards, followed by a shot. Horsemen burst into the camp, like a storm breaking into a peaceful sleep. 3 of them. Garrett, with a red beard and a rifle, led the attack.
Scalps or death!
He shouted. First, the boy with the bow fell, then one of the old men. Panic ensued. Women rushed to hide their children. Men grabbed their weapons, but many were outside the camp, fetching water, hunting. There was almost no defense left. Evelyn grabbed an old musket, heavy and familiar. The powder was damp, but the shot fired. The first shot hit the attacker in the shoulder. He fell. The second horseman raised his rifle, but suddenly a dog rushed under his hooves and knocked the horse down. She ran between the yurts, shouting to the children, "Take cover!" She pushed them inside, where it was safer. The women cried and moaned, but did not give up. One of them, with a child in her arms, threw a knife at Evelyn. Tahoe fought by the fire despite his wound. Blood flowed down his side, but he moved swiftly, like the wind. He fought the one who had once taken Tom from her. Garrett. Evelyn saw him. He stood there, smiling as if he recognized her.
Well, well,
He said.
the White Widow is now a redskin, my trophy.
He raised his rifle and aimed at Tahoe. But she fired first, not in the heart, but in the stomach. Garrett fell, gasping for breath, with a look of surprise on his face, as if the world had destroyed his rules. When everything quieted down, the sky opened up with rain. It was as if nature itself knew that now it was okay. The tribe gathered to bury the dead. The wounded were carried to the yurts. They cried, prayed, and sang. Then they lit bonfires. The fire cleansed the earth. The women threw dry grass, scalp husks, and the ashes of the dead into the flames. It was a night of fire, not of vengeance, but of gratitude. Tahoe lay under a blanket, wounded. Evelyn sat next to him, changing his bandages and giving him herbal tea to drink. His fingers were hot. He looked at her as if he were seeing her for the first time.
You stayed,
he said quietly.
Yes.
She replied. He closed his eyes and smiled. Late at night, Ashki approached her. Silently, she handed her a new necklace, thick, with amber and coyote teeth, a symbol of the woman who gave her spirit to the tribe.
You are no longer between worlds,
said the old woman.
You have become part of it.
Evelyn nodded. She took off her shirt, remaining in leather and ash. She went to the dance and stood in the circle. The drums beat like a heart. She raised her hands to the sky.
She danced, like dust, like wind, like flame.
Now everyone knew her name, Dancing with Mustangs, when the sun rises again. A year has passed. The morning greeted us with a quiet haze, a light shadow of fog over the slope. The canyon breathed fresh greenery, and the wind whispered gently in the grass, as if remembering names. A dozen Mustangs roamed peacefully in the valley. Their bodies shimmered in the first rays of dawn, like ghosts, like legends coming to life. A woman sat on top of a cliff. Her hair was the color of gold and ash. Her dress was made of deerskin and decorated with feathers. Her hands were strong, and her face had soft lines left by the sun and time. A baby boy with honey-colored skin and black hair slept on her lap. She rocked him gently, as if in time with the very breath of the earth. Tahoe quietly approached from behind. He didn't say a word. He just sat down next to her and handed her a mug of mint tea. She took it and smiled. Their shoulders barely touched, and that was enough. No more words were needed.
See?
She said, looking at the herd of Mustangs.
A year ago, I thought I would die in this cold, and now, everything around me is alive.
Then you were alone, he replied. Now you are part of us, and we are part of you.
She nodded and leaned against him. Around her neck hung a bride's necklace, darkened by time, but still powerful. The sun rose above the canyon, warm, bright, full of life, above the Mustangs, above the woman who had died that winter and been reborn. Now her spirit knew the way. Now she was home.